Okay, so we're in the middle of this Bible learning bonanza, and my question today is: did Plato know the Bible? In the second and third century, there were disputes going on among Christians who had become believers from philosophical pagan backgrounds like Justin Martyr and the pagans or the rabbis. And one of the statements of the early church fathers was that Plato had taken some of his evidence from the Bible. If I read you a little bit, did Plato cite a Bible version which preceded the Septuagint? That would appear to be the claim of Justin Martyr, the second century Christian apologist. But does this charge of plagiarism against Plato in the night myth of hold water? And so, according to Justin Martyr and some others, in that myth of Plato was literally citing from Deuteronomy, as something back there. And so through this book, we go back into the origins of the Greek Bible before the LXX. Again, it's for students. Not everybody is interested, but for me, it's very spiritually and intellectually satisfying to have a better understanding of the origins of our faith. And by going into these things, we can make sure that we don't allow the intellectual skepticism, which is so prevalent in the world today, to impact our faith, because our faith has answers and our faith is very, very spiritually and intellectually satisfying. So, what do I reference for this book? What do I say it is about? The belief that philosophers of Greece, including Plato and Aristotle, plagiarize certain of their teaching from Moses and the Hebrew prophets is an argument used by Christian apologists of Gentile backgrounds that lived in the first 4 centuries of Christianity. Three key figures who presented this thesis are Justin Martyr, the most important second century apologist, Clement of Alexandria, the illustrious head of the catechetical school at Alexandria, and is renowned as being possibly the teacher of Origen. He was born either in Alexandria or Athens. And our final giant who supports this thesis is Eusebius of Caesarea. I remember my professor Oded Urshai in Hebrew University in Jerusalem walking around with the books of Eusebius, and recognizing that so much Jewish wisdom is preserved by Eusebius in his preparation for the gospel and his defense of the gospel. In fact, it is said, and I think it was Louis Ginsburg who said this, but that half of Jewish law and tradition is preserved in the church and half of it among the rabbis. Because the rabbis did not preserve Josephus. They did not preserve the writings of the Hellenistic Jews. And there were Hellenistic Jews. They did not preserve the writings of Philo, but the church did. And so the two streams which came out of Zion in the first century, the rabbinic orthodoxy, which has grown into what you see today around the world, and the church, which has grown into this multi-billion, well, almost multi-billion dollar and person organization, both preserved Jewish law and tradition, legends, stories, thinking, all of it Jewish was preserved by these two organizations. And Eusebius of Caesarea, known as the father of church history. Each of these, in their defense of the Christian faith, presented some form of the thesis that the philosophers of Greece learned from the prophets of Israel. Our interest in this paper is to explore one example given of the theft given by Justin Martyr, and it's called the theft, the Greek theft. Okay. So in this book, in order to present this case, we divide our paper up into one, the background on the context of the charge; two, the Greek theft, what is it; three, the background, Moses and the philosophers. Moses was known among the philosophers. 1.3, early Greek connections with Hebrews. We show that the Greeks were connected to the Hebrews before the time of the LXX, and even back into the time of Jeremiah and Ezekiel. The tradition of Moses influencing the Greek philosophers, where it came from when it came. Justin Martyr accuses Plato. The testimony and works of Justin Martyr. Examining the charge of Justin Martyr. The myth of which is where Plato is supposed to have taken something from Moses. Assessing Plato's use or not of Moses, and the evidence of the pre-LXX Greek translation of the Torah, and the Hebrew connection in the myth of and then we end with a biography. So this book is so exciting for me as a saint who loves church history to discover, wow, was there a possibility that these great pagan philosophers were actually influenced by the Bible and by the word of God through Moses? Okay, so starting with the background context, we're not going to read the whole book, but we'll give you a taste. The Greek theft. The belief that philosophers of Greece, including Plato and Aristotle, plagiarized certain of their teaching from Moses and the Hebrew prophets is an argument by Christian apologists of Gentile background that lived in the first 4 centuries of Christianity. And we go on about the 3 figures, which we already mentioned. And we continue down here. Each of these, in their defense of the Christian faith, presented some form of the thesis that philosophers of Greece learned from the prophets of Israel. Our interest in this paper is to explore one example given of the theft given by Justin Martyr. He represents the position of Christian apology in the middle of the 2nd century, as opposed to the later Clement of Alexandria and the even later Eusebius of Caesarea. So we're talking about one of the earlier forms of this tradition. In light of the stature and credibility of these 3 church fathers, even if the idea that Plato learned from Moses seems far-fetched, we would do well to take a closer look at the argument and the evidence presented by men of such stature, the background of Moses and the philosophers. Before going into the specific examples of plagiarism given by Justin Martyr, we need to look at the possible roots of the tradition of Greeks borrowing from Moses. Firstly, we know Greece and Israel had contacts with each other going back even as far as the Middle Bronze Age. Most scholars believe in the Philistines, who are described as sea peoples by the Egyptians, had much interaction with Israel, were Greek. Secondly, Moses came from Egypt, and various Greek philosophers, including Plato and Pythagoras, visited Egypt. It is possible that both some philosophers and Moses gained their ideas from a common source, the traditions in Egypt. Although they were in Egypt at very different times, the continuity of these ideas is a possibility. Third, a third context is that Greece and Israel, or the Levant, had strong trading relations in the time of Josiah, that is around 627 BC. This is 300 years before Plato, and trade was one of the key ways of the religious ideas, religious ideas spread from one community to another. It is clear that prophets Ezekiel, Daniel, and Zechariah had some connection with Greece and the Greek islands. This interaction would clearly be 2 ways, with information about Israel and its life, including religious faith, flowing into Greece and vice versa. In this way, Moses' ideas could have been in the academic and cultural arena of Plato's education. Amen. Even ignoring his trip to Egypt during the Persian period, any nation having extensive trading connection with Israel or the kingdom of Judah would, all things being equal, hear of the basic Jewish beliefs and the sources of them, even Moses. Some scholars believe that much of the Pentateuch was written by Moses. Jewish tradition of the years before Plato also held to this position. 2 of the biblical texts we have regarding Javan, the Hebrew term for Greece, and her islands are written in the Pentateuch. Many footnote we have here. Many scholars today would date these references to the time of Josiah around 610 BC, and in that period, Greece would most definitely have connection with Israel. Greek connections with Hebrews. The Hebrew designation for Greece is Yavan. This consists of Yod, Vav, Ayin. These three letters, Yod, Vav, Nun, sorry. These three letters are connected to Ion, as in Ionians, one of the Greek peoples of Asia Minor. Yod, Vav, Nun can be translated as Ion as easily as Yavan. The first mention of the family of the Greeks in this way is in Genesis 10 in the table of nations. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Yavan, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tiras. Genesis 10:2. This shows that the worlds of Greece and Israel were not so distant. The fact that Greeks inhabited coastlands and islands is also known by the author of Genesis, showing that there were some clear connections before the days of Plato. And the sons of Javan, Elisha, and Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim, by these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, and their families in their nations. We see that the Hebrews writer had a very clear understanding of the places where the Greeks lived, and so there was very likely to be clear relations with these people at some time during the Middle Bronze Age to the Iron Age, all preceding the birth of Plato and corresponding with the early Greek philosophers. Although these connections are many and could be multiplied, I refer you to two sources which go into detail of the connection between the two societies before Plato and Moses. One, Cyrus Gordon's The Common Background of Greek and Hebrew Civilizations, 1965, argues that the many parallels between the two societies are explained by the ancient Common Near East background of the two societies. A number of articles in Interpreter's one-volume commentary on the Bible, 1970, overviewed the non-literary evidence for connection between the two societies in that period. The tradition of Moses influencing the Greek philosophers. Justin Martyr was not the first to see the connection between Moses and the Greek philosophers. Before his time, there was a long-standing tradition of respect towards Moses among Greek and Roman writers. Gauger notes, the revealing is the exalted status given to Moses as a lawgiver, ranking with the legendary heroes of ancient civilization. Given the time Diodorus was writing and the ultimate sources of his material, these texts would be invaluable witnesses for pagans' opinions of Judaism. They reflect a long-established tradition shared widely by Jews and pagans alike that regarded Judaism as a divinely revealed philosophy, with Moses as its founder and spokesman. Gauger gives a long list of pagan writers reflecting this knowledge of Moses. Before Diodorus, the understanding appears in Hecataeus of Abdera, Megasthenes, Clearchus of Soli, and Hermippus. Later, it will persist in Numenius, Porphyry, Celsus, and Julian. This is John Gauger. We also have earlier writers who assert that Greek philosophers copied the Jews who were taught by Moses. One 3rd century writer, a certain Hermippus, made this claim. Hermippus had claimed that Pythagoras himself copied the teaching of the Jews and Thracians and introduced many points of Jewish law into his philosophy. Okay, so this is so interesting that I wrote a paper on it, and I hope that you will find it interesting also. I don't want to give you away the conclusion. If I give you the conclusion, all the fun's gone. So you'll find this wonderful work on lulu.com. Feel free. And there is a sale going on at the moment. And you look at A. Michael Hilton Hart Zion on Facebook, and also lulu.com, and use the link Plato's Bible. I'm sure there is no other book with that name anywhere on planet Earth. God bless you so much. I'll put a link below so that you can find your way over there. And we're going to be doing over the next 10 days lots and lots of knowledge, lots and lots of insight into these things. Have a great day.